Good afternoon, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate, and I actually don't have to age restrict this one, or at least I don't think I should have to. I can go back and change if need be, but I will have to consult with my lovely consultant, who is lovely. I would like to talk to you today about how bioethical principles have changed over time in regards to the physical treatment of people with disabilities who are not living at home. Okay. In the past, institutionalization was much more common than it is now. Nowadays, however, you are much more likely to find things like community homes and group homes where people with similar needs go to live together and be taken care of. When they age out of their parents being able to care for them properly, it is usually nowadays quite common for people with disabilities, if they cannot live independently, to live in these group homes. However, in the past, and this does get into bioethical principles, okay? We will get into that aspect of it. In the past, people with disabilities, and especially those with intellectual disabilities, tended to be put into rather large institutions. And these institutions would sometimes look like almost like cathedrals, but sometimes they would be straight up asylums. And nowadays, we don't like to institutionalize people anymore, or not nearly as much, because the practice was quite a while ago deemed to be dehumanizing. And I think that that is quite the accomplishment in terms of both the medical and social models. Because a lot of the time, and here's where you get into the bioethical issues surrounding institutionalization, a lot of the time in these institutions, and especially in asylums, people would be subjected to various different kinds of highly unethical treatment and highly unethical medical practices. And I'm not talking about any sort of fascist practices that you would see in countries where the APA had not implemented regulations, or the APA or similar organizations throughout the world. And I am speaking specifically of what went on in World War II. But we don't need to get into that aspect of it, because when it came to institutionalization, it didn't have so much to do with experimenting on the bodies of people with disabilities, but it had much more to do with the so-called cure narrative and seeing whether people could be cured of their various kinds of psychosis or neurosis or even intellectual disability, and people would be subject to things like electroshock therapy. And well, even until fairly recently, this was also used as a treatment for depression. Nowadays, thankfully, it has lapsed, not necessarily into obsolescence. It can still, in very extreme cases, be used, but we are definitely growing to see that this is a very unethical practice, because while electroshock therapy could theoretically reroute some of the electrical signals going on in the brain, which could be an underlying cause of depression, many causes are comorbid with one another. There's never just going to be one thing that causes a particular disability, a particular mental illness. It is most often going to be a conjunction of factors working together to form out this kind of personality, this kind of mind, this kind of body, so on and so forth. So nowadays, when it comes to institutionalization versus living in group homes, you get much more of the latter, because the emphasis now is being placed much more on the social model of disability rather than on the medicalized aspect of disability. And it's not so much that we are seeking to cure, people with disabilities anymore, as we are seeking to make their lives more comfortable and to seek to make them feel more worthy, more loved, more cared for as individuals, and not even necessarily in an infantilizing way. I know a person who lives in a group home and is independent of her parents, therefore. And really, once she came of age, it was the decision that she should live in group homes, and she was moved around several times between homes until she found a good fit. And where she is now, I think, is a pretty good place for her. Um, her activities are monitored, her diet is monitored much of the time, but at the same time, she has much greater freedom and she is given the responsibilities that she would be both physically and intellectually capable of carrying out by herself. For example, she can clean her own room, she can make her own bed. She can care for herself, for her body personally, and she doesn't need the extent of help that one may consider, because you don't know, as I have said in previous videos, you don't know the extent of a person's abilities unless those abilities are tested in a kind of quotation marks around this live ammo environment. In other words, you are still being cared for, you are still being protected, but at the same time, it is quite important that you be given uh, any measure of independence that you are capable of having. The idea behind group homes is that, as I say, people with similar disabilities will live together so that they can be cared for as a group and much more effectively care for themselves because they are with people who understand them and whom they understand. This is especially true of the actual workers in the field, who will very often be very empathetic people and people who are well versed in how to care for this particular disability group versus this particular disability group, right? So, a common example of this, as I say, is people with intellectual disabilities. But disabilities are often comorbid with one another. I have been through the home in question and have seen the accommodations and the facilities. And I remember, I've only been there once or twice, but I do remember that the hallways are very, very wide in order to accommodate wheelchairs, and, eating spaces are accessible, and there's an elevator to go between the floors. And these are very reasonable accommodations when you have many different, quote, kinds of people living together, those who have different needs, those who have different abilities, and those who have different capabilities. As I say, for example, my friend is capable of making small meals, of caring for herself, and of, cleaning her space, but at the same time, you would not necessarily see her working in a factory or as an accountant, that kind of thing. The very good thing I find about group homes is that not only are you surrounded by people of your own community, shall we say, but you are also in an environment where you are understood and where the abilities that you do have can be much more properly expressed. If you were with someone who was not capable of understanding how your mind or body operated fully, or had the potential to operate fully, then you would not be able to reach that potential. But when surrounded by people who get you, shall we say, and surrounded by people who know what you could be capable of doing, it's going to be a much more rewarding and dignified life than if you were stuck in mommy and daddy's basement for the rest of your life. Another issue that is comorbid with this one is the issue of independent living. And I would like to talk about that on Monday because there are bioethical principles involved here too. I know that much of this video has addressed more along the lines of the social model than the medical model, but trust me when I say that people with similar bodies and minds will be more likely to get along better together than a person just living, as I say, in mommy and daddy's basement, because it's not exactly a viable solution to. It's definitely not a viable solution to just shut someone up. And one of the major principles of autonomy is the right to be autonomous. The whole medical principle of autonomy is the right to be independent, the right to express your capabilities, the right to have your needs fulfilled, both by yourself and by others. That's the end of the video. I'm getting the phone, and I take weekends off, so I will see you on Monday. Mwah!